Throw confetti, bring out the balloons, and get some cake and ice cream because today we are celebrating the 100th episode of the Life's Key 3 podcast. Stay tuned.
If your desire is to become spiritually stronger, emotionally healthier, and relationally smarter, you're at the right place. Speaker and writer Stephanie Smith inspires and equips you to achieve these three key aims. If you're a parent, you'll also learn how to raise empowered kids, ready for adulthood. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Life's Key 3 podcast. I am delighted that you are here. Today is going to be very different than our regular episodes, either on Tuesdays or on Thursdays. If this happens to be the first time that you're listening, or maybe you've just become a new listener and you've listened to only a couple of episodes before, you might listen to today and think, what in the world is this about? Well, I guarantee you, I am going to tie this into Life's Key 3. However, because it is the 100th episode, I'm going to do something a little bit different today. Normally on Tuesdays, I'm focused on an episode that helps you really to become spiritually strong. And this year, we've been tracking through significant passages of the Bible. And then on Thursdays, I really focus episodes on helping parents, caregivers, and even educators on knowing how to raise kids who are ready for adulthood and equipped to engage fully in God's grand story. I'm going to share with you a little bit of the history of this podcast, but it's not just about the history of this podcast. I want to use this as a way to encourage you in your life. I'm also going to share just a few statistics for you that you might already know and you might find interesting about the podcasting world. Today, there are over 4 million, close to 4.2 million podcasts registered around the world. And out of that number, there are about 2.6 million that play on Apple Podcasts. That's the largest podcast platform that there is where people go to listen. And out of that number of podcasts, there are about 150 million podcast episodes. Now, this is interesting to me. Out of those 4 point whatever million podcasts, the average podcast only has 50 episodes. Now, again, you have to really do the math there. That's an average out of 150 million podcast episodes out of about 4 million, podcasts in total. So I am delighted to say we're very much beating the average around here at Life's Key 3. Now, because there is no central clearinghouse for all podcasts, it's a little difficult to nail down all of the statistics about podcasts, especially on a global basis. However, we do know there was a tremendous jump in the number of people who began podcasts back in the year 2020. Yeah, that year of COVID. And no surprise there. And then we had for 20 and 21, and then there was a precipitous drop in the year 2022 as far as a lot of people stopped podcasting. And there were new podcasts that began in that year, but not nearly as much as had happened in the last couple. Now, I started this podcast in October of 2022. So I didn't hop on the bandwagon during COVID. It was after that. And when I first launched this podcast, it went by a different name. It actually had the name Bringing Light to Truth. Not bringing truth to light, but bringing light to truth. And after a while, I decided I didn't feel like that name really reflected what I was wanting to accomplish. And I did get some feedback from people that felt like that from that name, that they thought it was going to be a podcast that was going to dig into and reveal, dirt that was hidden on people or something like that. And I was like, no, that's not at all what it's about here. So very glad to have done the work to change that name. I'll give you a little insider information here. Changing the name of a podcast is not easy. You don't just go into some file somewhere and just go, oh, I'm going to give this a new name. When you start a podcast, you have a podcast platform host, and that's the service that where you upload your podcast and then it distributes it, to different places. And depending on your host, you still have to do the work to say, here's all of the podcast players where I want this podcast to be found. That can be on Apple Podcasts, that's on Spotify, that's on Addict, there's Overcast. I mean, there's all kinds of different podcast players where you can listen to your podcast. And again, depending on how integrated those are with your host, you can still spend a lot of time going into each one of those different places where you want people to be able to listen to your podcast. But once all that initial work is done, then you're just dealing with your podcast host. I also had launched another podcast called Three Educators because I also have a real heart for Christian school educators. I have experience of 25 years as a home educator, but I also have experience with Christian education. And those folks are near and dear to my heart, as are home educators. And you can still find that podcast, even though it is on hiatus. And I don't know, I may pick it back up again someday and record new episodes, and I may not. But those episodes are evergreen. And that means that the information that's in there is going to still be good information now and in the future, not just at the time that it first came out. And that's my hope as well for the Life's Key 3 podcast. Another change that I made wasn't a change in mission, but it was a change in wording. If you go back and you listen to some of the very early podcast episodes, you will hear me talk about Life's Key 3 in this kind of language. It is in terms of to learn yourself, to love God, and to live connected. How do you like that for alliteration? And that is still my heart, but I felt like over time it didn't really express with great clarity what I was wanting to accomplish. And so I didn't shift my vision or my hope, but I did change the language to help people become spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart. And those are things that people grasp very, very quickly. And not only in terms of understanding the language, but understanding the benefit of that and the importance of that. Not too many people are going to argue with the value in being emotionally healthy or relationally smart. Certainly, there are people who are not going to be on board with the whole spiritually strong thing, but they are going to at least understand the importance of being emotionally healthy and relationally smart. You don't really have to explain that to them. But when it came to learn yourself, love God, and live connected, that could feel a little like, okay, I understand what that is, but I don't necessarily really see the relevance of that in my everyday life. So that was the reason for changing that language. Now you may be listening to this and saying, "Oh, I'm glad that's might be fascinating to you, Stephanie. I don't know why you're telling me this." One of the reasons that I'm telling you this is because I want you to think about in your own life, where might a change in language make a change in how you connect with other people? And that very well may begin with the language that you use with yourself. The importance of self talk really cannot be overestimated. If there was some kind of an app that we could plug in and it would record all of the things that we say to ourselves every single day that we don't voice out loud, I'm not sure that I would want a printout of those things. On the other hand, it might really help me to be able to identify, hey, these are the things that are good and I need to hold on to these. But man, I didn't realize how many things that I was saying to myself that I really need to change. And it's easy when we look at self talk that we can typically recognize is incredibly negative. If we say to ourselves, oh, you're so stupid, or you're just so dumb, or you're such a klutz, or are you ever just going to get it together? We can generally recognize when we are saying those things to ourselves that we hopefully wouldn't be saying to another person. But there's other self talk that might not be that overt, but it's still damaging and destructive to our lives. It might be things like, I can't do this. I can't take this. I can't stand that person. That driver needs to just get off the road. Or it might even be things like, oh, go ahead and eat that. Oh, go ahead and buy that. You know you deserve that. It's no big deal. Oh, you can make up for that again later. But the things that we say to ourselves about ourselves are incredibly important. So I encourage you to think about what are the things that you are saying to yourself? What's the language that you are using? Would you want somebody else to be able to listen in on the conversation that you have with yourself or about others? Or would you be kind of embarrassed by that? And then, of course, we have the language that we use with other people. And this is where it's not just about stopping saying things that are mean or hateful or unkind. Sometimes it's a matter of putting in the work to learn how to say something that better communicates what it is that we feel or we think. Because no two people on this planet really truly speak the same language. And you might be going, what do you mean by that? Of course they do. Well, in the sense of having a general language category, of course. However, no two people use every word, every phrase, every pause the exact same way and with the exact same meaning in the exact same way. It's just impossible. All of us, just as we have our own unique set of fingerprints, we all really do have a language and a style of communication that is unique and specific to us. If you're familiar with children's activity books like preschool and early elementary school, one of the activity books that one of the activities you'll often find in those books is what's called dot to dot. And this is where somebody has placed a lot of dots on a page and they haven't drawn the lines connecting those dots. And it's up to the child to figure out how they're supposed to connect those dots to create an outline of a picture that they are then supposed to color in or to paint in. Some people have dot to dot communication styles. They put a bunch of dots out there and then they want other people to connect those dots to figure out what they're trying to say. For those folks, they might need to learn, well, not might, they need to learn how to connect those dots for people because every time somebody else is left to connect those dots, you increase the possibility of misunderstanding. Other people have a communication style that's probably a little bit more like the paint by numbers sets. Now, if you're not familiar with those, that's where somebody has done a drawing, and it's all outlined. And then in each different section, there's a number or a letter, and then there is a set of paints, and there's a sheet of paper or instructions that goes along with that. And if it says wherever it says number one, for example, then you look over at the code and it says, oh, number one is green. And so every place that has a number one on that drawing, you're supposed to paint in green. And if you follow the code, then eventually you are going to get the finished product of what they have drawn and what they are wanting you then to color in. Now, this communication style is definitely better than the dot to dot communication style, but it still requires other people to do the work to kind of figure out your code and then to plug those thoughts and those beliefs and not just what you're saying, but the weight and the value that you are giving to those things as well. Now, to be certain, the longer that we are in a relationship with someone at a more intimate level, then there is a point to which it can be appropriate to kind of use the dot to dot or the paint by numbers. I mean, certainly we don't want to have to spend the time to explain in depth something that we mean when we have been in a relationship with somebody for 10 years. There are shortcuts that are reasonable to expect people to develop over time. But we still have to be careful that we don't make assumptions either about how we are interpreting what someone else says or about our own communication. You also have the communication style where someone has done a total painting, and all you have to do is stand there and to look at it, and you can have clarity about what they were wanting to convey. And you may have questions about why they chose to paint the scene this way, or why did they put the tree in that location and not the other place. But you're not left with this dot to dot style of communication. And you're also not left having to fill it all in with some kind of code, like in a paint by numbers type of communication. Now, those aren't the only communication styles that there are. I know for me, sometimes my communication style can be a little bit more like standing there at an art festival and wanting to explain to someone, let me tell you why I picked out this shade of blue. And they're just wanting to say, hey, lady, we just wanted to look at the painting. So as you examine your communication style and those around you, think about if there are places, because there's probably at least one, where you need to put in some work to change the language so that you can be a more effective communicator. In this world of podcasting, there are a zillion, okay, maybe not a zillion, but sometimes it feels that way, decisions that are made. And a lot of those are made in the beginning, but we have to be open to changing those. I have changed the podcast platform host more than once as I've been doing this podcast, and that's not always an easy thing to do either. That can have a financial impact, and it can also just involve a lot of work while making that transition. And transitions are another one of those things in life that all of us have to deal with sooner or later in one way or another. And what drives our decision to be able to say, I'm going to stick with this podcast host, or no, it's time to change uh, for whatever reason that is. And we have to end up doing that in life in a lot of our relationships. How do we decide, you know what? I need to keep investing. I need to stay where I am, and I just need to work through the things that I don't find really enjoyable, because I don't know that there's any one size fits all. It's going to have everything exactly the way that I want it in any kind of technology. And so, at what point do I put up with the things that I don't like? But in order to take advantage and to value the things that are there. And we have to make those decisions in our relationships. And that's one of the reasons that part of the Life's Key 3, one of those 3 keys is to help you become relationally smart. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time elaborating on that analogy. But the one thing that I would say about that is you want to know why you are walking away from something, whether it is a relationship, whether it is a job, whether it is a church, whether it is a career, whether it is a goal that you've had, a regimen that you've had in your life. Why are you walking away from something? You have to get really honest about that. And then you have to be really honest about what are you moving into. And you want to avoid the whole shiny object or shiny person syndrome. And that is where you look at where you are and all of the weaknesses that are there and all of the things that you don't like. And it's so easy to do that and then to look out and then to think that, oh, somebody else or some other job or some other church, oh, they're not going to have any of those issues. And here's the thing, they may not, but you know what? They will have some other issues that eventually, given enough time, you will find out you don't like. Now, one of the advantages that a lot of technology has that we don't always have in life are the free trials. And so you get a week or you might even get 30 days of a free trial to be able to test out a software or even a podcast platform. And then you can say, oh, I think this is going to work for me, or no, it's not. But you know what? Even sometimes in those free trials, you don't really get the full picture and you're not there long enough to really know if it's going to be a good fit or not. And that's just the way it is with the decisions that we make in life about the people and the places that we choose to be a part of. I don't know how many different podcast hosting platforms there are, but I know that there are a lot. And I know how many that I have looked at and tried to do research on. And the reality is that I could just get all overwhelmed and say, it's just too much. I'm never going to do this at all. Or to be able to just hop from one to the other, hoping that there's going to be somehow this perfect platform. But we don't want to do that in our life. That would be a total waste of time and money as a podcaster. And yet, oftentimes, we can end up doing that in our personal lives. And the cost is so much higher, not just for us, but for those around us. So avoid shiny object syndrome if you are in a job or in a relationship or a church or wherever it is and looking across town or across the hall or across the globe or whatever and thinking, oh, that person or that place, that's just going to be so much better without really digging in, doing your homework, and then being really, really honest about why am I walking away? Because the other thing is that sometimes we do need to make changes, but we want to be very honest about why we are doing those and not just honest, but more importantly than that, we want to be smart about the decisions that we make. And that is where one of the things that the Bible tells us is that in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. And that doesn't just mean counselors in the way that we would use that here in the United States today, of therapists and life coaches and psychiatrists and psychologists and all of that, but rather it's talking about wise people, people who are experienced and people who have wisdom. And it tells us that it's in the multitude of those because if we only rely on one person, well, you know what? Everybody has got their issues and they have their blind spots as well. And so when we look at a multitude of people that have wisdom, that is going to increase the probability for us to make safe, wise decisions. Well, I want to tell you this. I appreciate you being here because out of those 4.7 million or whatever podcasts that are floating around in the world, you've chosen to be here and to listen to this one. So thank you so much. I value your time. And again, if you're new and this is the first time you've ever listened to an episode, just stick around because I'll be back next Tuesday with as we wrap up and the book of Nehemiah. We're close to wrapping that up and all of the life lessons that are contained in that phenomenal book for us to use today. And then I will be back next Thursday, again focusing on helping parents and caregivers and mentors and those who care about the next generation, helping to raise kids to impact them so that they are ready for adulthood. If you don't know, you can visit my website, stephaniepresents.com. As a speaker, I speak to women's groups as well as homeschool conferences, conventions, schools, Christian schools, and organizations helping parents just the way that I want to do here on this podcast. And you can find resources and information, and you can sign up for my weekly newsletter, High Impact, which is going to help you to become spiritually stronger, emotionally healthier, and relationally smarter. Thanks so much for being here. Hey, on this 100th episode, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a rating and review. You can go to my website. The email's on there, a contact form is on there. I'd love to hear what you have found helpful. And as always, I welcome your questions, your comments, your suggestions on how I can better serve you as a listening audience. Thank you so much for my friend. And as always, remember this: you do have an impact that is immeasurable, eternal, and irreplaceable. I'll see you next time on episode 101.
Thank you for listening. Visit the website stephaniepresents.com and sign up for High Impact to join the mission of building spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart women and families. You can also book Stephanie to speak at your event and check out additional resources. Together, we can invite and equip generations to engage fully in God's grand story.